Hello everybody. I'm just going to share my screen. And hopefully you can all see some slides. Yeah, okay, Greta's put her thumbs up, so that means you can see them. My name's Clare Truman, and I kind of wear three hats. I have my own business, which is Spectrum Space Education Training and Consultancy, and through that I talk to schools and colleges and talk to groups of parents and families about all sorts of issues involving supporting autistic children and young people, particularly in education and particularly those with PDA, but not exclusively. And I also provide distance learning packages for children and young people who are out of school or finding it difficult to attend. So I'll talk a little bit about that at the end. I'm also doing a PhD at the moment about PDA, and I'm big sister to an autistic young man. So that's just a little bit about me. And I'm here to talk to you just very briefly about my kind of views on how we can keep learning going when people are finding it difficult to attend school or not attending school at all. And then I'll talk a little bit about the distance learning packages and what they look like. And then there'll be lots of time for discussion. It's just a very short presentation. So one of the things that strikes me when I go into schools or colleges or talk to families where children are not attending school is that there can be a view that the whole focus becomes getting the child back into school. So the sort of everything is narrowed down to getting the child back into school. And whilst for some children that is important and that is useful, I feel that when you're in that situation where attendance is just too much, it's important to pull out the reasons behind wanting the child to go to school. That can sound like a really silly question to be asking, sort of why do we want the child to go to school, but I think actually unpicking that can be really useful in terms of identifying priorities. So often people say that they want the child to go to school because they want them to be learning, they want them to have a good education, and an education that has the maximum opportunities for employment in the future and for further education and higher education. So learning is often the main thing that people mention. People also mention that they want the child to be happy, sometimes that they want the child to be socialising with other children. They want the child to be sort of, I always think we want them to be healthy, happy and learning. That's the aim. And school is one way to facilitate that, but it's not the only way. And when children are not attending school, instead of focusing solely on getting them back, I like to pull those things apart and focus on, well, how can we keep someone healthy while they're at home? How can we keep someone happy while they're at home? How can we particularly continue learning while they're at home? So what are we aiming for? And sometimes that can be useful to talk to professionals and talk to the school about when the focus does seem to have narrowed down to getting the child back through the door. So in terms of keeping a child sort of healthy, I'm not a doctor, so I need to kind of start by saying I'm not a doctor. So always seek advice from your GP, always seek advice from CAMS. But I think allowing recovery time is really helpful. If you feel that the reason, and I think most of you here, that's why you're here, that the reason that the child is not attending school is due to high anxiety, then allowing recovery time from whatever's caused that anxiety is really important. And I think sometimes that can be overlooked by the professionals supporting you, but I think it's really important. And then you've got the kind of typical things that people often mention about kind of exercise, healthy food, sleep hygiene, that kind of thing. I think when someone is feeling very anxious, particularly if the trigger of school hasn't been removed completely, if the feeling is that you're trying to get someone back to school eventually, I think it's important to offer a lot of choice and to be offering things rather than insisting on things. So to have healthy food around the house rather than insisting that someone eats 5 portions of fruit and vegetables a day, for example. So you're offering rather than insisting. That's particularly useful for children with a PDA profile, that kind of offering and choice. And I put a little "if possible" at the end of the last bullet point about supporting sleep hygiene, because I think I've heard a lot of people focus a lot on sleep hygiene. It is important, but again, when someone's very anxious, it can be difficult to get that sleep right. So again, it's an "if possible," it's an offering rather than an insisting. And happy kind of links to that. So seeking advice from GP and CAMS. Children may be far away from as happy as we want them to be in this situation. So again, it's important to allow recovery time, but also to offer activities that they enjoy. And sometimes I've heard professionals say sort of, "Oh, you don't want to make home too fun because then they won't go back to school." So sometimes I've heard that kind of, "Oh, don't make home too comforting or too much fun, otherwise they'll never come back to school." But actually, we're trying to encourage recovery, and as part of that, we need to allow children to enjoy things, because that's part of recovery. So I always say offering activities that people enjoy is important. And then the learning bit, which is, I'm a teacher, so by background, so that's kind of my thing, is the learning bit. Some strategies that can be useful here. There's something called strewing, which is where you leave educational resources just lying around. So you might have a book about your child's special interest, and you might just leave that lying around on a table in the living room, and it's just there if they want to pick it up. So you don't make any demand to pick it up, you don't place any expectation, you're just leaving it there in case someone wants to pick it up. So that sort of approach can be useful. For older students, sometimes something that just seems a little bit different to school. So something like, I use a lot of TED Ed videos. I don't know if you've seen those. They're like TED Talks, but for slightly, for teenagers. And they cover a range of really interesting topics. And they're only about 10 minutes long. Sticking one of those on YouTube on the telly and watching it yourself might be interesting, and just seeing if your child, if that piques their interest at all in finding out something new. And it's a bit different from the curriculum. It doesn't feel like school. I think it's important to keep things optional. So to not insist on completing a certain amount of learning at a time at the moment if people are very anxious, but to be offering things rather than insisting again. I use the functional skills criteria a lot. These are criteria drawn up by the Department for Education for English and maths, and a digital skills, sort of ICT, has come on board recently as well. And they break down the sort of skills that you need in literacy and numeracy for everyday life. So it takes away Shakespeare, for example, and your kind of complicated trigonometry, and it focuses on the things that you actually might need. So at the lower end, that's kind of your counting, your identifying coins, telling the time. And at the more challenging end, you're looking at things like calculating interest, compound interest, working out how much you're going to be taxed on your wage slip, that kind of thing. But it's all stuff that is practical and links to everyday life. And I find that those can be good places to start. So if you are looking at maybe electively home educating eventually, or putting together education other than at school package, or you're looking to just keep learning going while you wait for someone to be ready to go back to school, then the functional skills criteria can be more accessible, and I can send those around when I send my slides to Lucy and Greta. And then Finally, the PDA Society Home Education Hub. I don't know if people have seen that. Even if your child it doesn't have a PDA, their home education hub is just a wealth of resources. So I just signpost you to that, because it has just loads and loads of resources for how to keep learning going. Even if you're not thinking of electively home educating, even if your child doesn't have PDA, there's just so much on there. There's links to learning websites, but there's also advice about how to make learning more comfortable when you're anxious about a school type environment. So that's signposting there. So that's the kind of how I'd keep things going. And then about Spectrum Space, the first thing to say is I do have a long waiting list, but I'm happy to add people to the waiting list if that would be helpful. And what I do is I send boxes of learning activities linked to students' interests, and I send them to their house every week. So a courier comes with a box, and it's quite a big box, and in it has learning activities that are based on the functional skills criteria I mentioned a minute ago, and also on something called ASDAN, which is a sort of exam board that specialises in courses for people who are not in maybe traditional education, or who have special educational needs, and gives an overview of all subjects, but in a very practical way. And the activities link students' interests to those targets. So if a student is learning to count to 20 and loves football, then it'll be a football and a goal, mini goalpost, and you kick the ball 20 times into the goalpost. If you're learning to count to 20 and you love My Little Pony, then it'll be 20 My Little Ponies. So it links to whatever you're interested in, and it goes all the way up to the calculating compound interest type level. So whatever the child's interested in, that's what the activities are based on. And students complete them, some students complete them independently, some of my older students. Some students complete them with family, and occasionally there are assistance provided by either another provider or the local authority. I don't have assistance myself, I'm a one-man band, so I can't provide staff, but sometimes people have staff provided by the local authority or by another provider. There are places in Surrey that provide them. And the programme is funded through either through an EHCP that specifies education other than at school, or by the school where your child is registered, if they are registered at a school, and they seek top-up funding. It gets a bit complicated, but they get the money from the local authority and they pay me like that. So it's not parents paying, it's the local authority paying. And the boxes look like this. This was for a lad who loves Shaun the Sheep and Nerf guns. Those are his main interests, Shaun the Sheep and Nerf guns. And he also likes playing games. So we had, for example, a kind of board game about multiplication facts. We had some top trumps cards for adding 2-digit numbers. And then we had some Nerf gun sorting shapes and stickers, Nerf gun stickers into diagrams. We had Shaun the Sheep fractions mat, so that he could identify halves and quarters using Shaun the Sheep. So it's kind of all practical stuff. It's not worksheets, it's hands-on, linked to people's interests. So that's a very quick whirlwind tour of Spectrum Space, but I'm sure there'll be lots of questions. There's lots of time to ask questions now, but if you have a question that you don't want to ask in the group, or if you want to be added to the waiting list, then my email address is there, and there's more information about the distance learning programs on the website, which is at the top there. And I am also on social media, but I'm not very good at social media. So if you want a response, then email is the best way to contact me, because I'm just rubbish on Facebook. And that's a little summary.